Good morning. Welcome to day 2. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Philip Laria. I'm a graduate student at SVA, the Masters of Branding program. I also serve as a strategist at Profession New York. Today I'm honored to introduce our next speaker, Stephanie Pereira. Stephanie is the head of strategic initiatives at Imprint Projects. Prior to that, she spent over 6 years at Kickstarter. There, she was part of the senior leadership team for much of that time. Just part of her role included global initiatives and strategic partnerships focused on creator acquisition and engagement. We asked her what she's most proud of. She's most proud of all the projects she's helped bring to life throughout her career at Kickstarter and the many creative people she's helped empower there. While she was there, she had an impact on over 500 people, creatives at Kickstarter. She's most excited to continue to support the creative community in her new role at Imprint Projects and beyond. So please join me in welcoming Stephanie to the How Design Live stage. Thank you.
Hey everyone, I have to take a picture because yesterday I posted that this room is really big and I want people to understand what I meant. Okay, thanks for being on my Instagram. Hi, welcome to Strategic Storytelling. During today's session, we're going to talk about how to get that creative idea out of your head and into the world, or how to build a following for an idea you already have in the world. So quick show of hands, and it's fine, you don't have to raise your hand, but who here has a creative idea in mind during this session? Okay, because this is going to inform how I run it. So about half of you, that's cool, congratulations. The rest of you, get to it. So before we begin, you just heard a bit about me, but I want you to know that I created this workshop while I was working at Kickstarter. It was something I developed for all those creators I was working with, both individually and also at large. And I'm currently working at a creative agency called Imprint Projects, where our mission is actually to replace advertising. So I want you to know that this workshop has nothing to do with advertising. You're going to wonder, why is this woman not talking about advertising? And I'm telling you, this is not about advertising on purpose. And so taking a step back is, I think, the #1 thing that I advise most people to do when you're thinking about a creative project and how to bring it to life in the community that you care about. I think you get so caught up in the details and the studio and the process and the practice that you forget sort of like, I know why I care about this. Why would other people care about this? What is its role in the world? And so take a step back, clarify that vision for yourself, but also for your community, and then also make a strategic plan. So not just, blah, I did a thing, because it's really scary to make a thing. So it's like, I did a thing, and let me tell you about why you should care about it. So that's the purpose of this workshop. In a stunning act of oversimplification, I've boiled it down into 4 steps. I don't think these are the 4 end-all be-all steps, but in the spirit of time and trying to fit this into 45 minutes, these are the 4 steps. 1, we're going to talk about key messages and how to make them. 2, we're going to talk about practicing and refining those messages. 3, we're going to talk about building your list so you can make sure that when you're ready to launch, you have a group of fans and advocates waiting for you. And then finally, 4, this is about promoting, not just promoting, but promoting with intent. So these are the 4 things I'm going to cover. And ideally, this is going to take me about 30 minutes, which should leave us 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. And I'm telling you this now so that you can start writing down your questions while I talk. And then when I get to the end and I say questions, it's not awkwardly silent. So please write down your questions while I talk. Spare me the awkwardness. So let's start with key messages. So to find a key message, you have to ask yourself, first, what are you making? And second, who is going to care about it? And I'm going to use a real-life example of the Invisible Dog Art Center. Does anyone know Invisible Dog by any chance? Cool. Let me introduce it to you. So this is an interdisciplinary art center in Brooklyn, New York, where I live. It's run by this local character, an incredible man named Lucien Zayan. It features contemporary art installations and also live performance and also weddings and artist studio space And they also offer these incredible art-filled apartments that they make available for rent. So with all of these stories to choose from, which of these messages is your headline? Well, it depends on who you are trying to reach. So here is a tool that I designed to help people find their key messages. These are the messages you go out into the world with. These are the messages. This is your drumbeat message. This is the thing you say over and over and over again. Your key message is also the root from which all your copy, all your images, all your assets, everything stems from. So these are really important. If for those of you who have a creative idea that you're working on actively or that you would like to launch, I see some of you already doing it. I highly recommend taking a picture of this. Like I said, this is a tool that I used while at Kickstarter and I've used since, and I think that it's just really elegant and really simple. So starting with your goals, this might be obvious, but it's important to start with your goals because, again, if your key message is where everything stems from, you want to make sure that your message is rooted in your goals and your core values and your vision. So goals, by the way, don't have to be very fancy or complicated. It could be as simple as, I want to make a short film. That is fine. I would encourage you to have a couple of goals, though, to think about how you can go beyond where you already are. So maybe it's, I want to make a short film and I want the whole world to know about it. Or I want to make a short film and I want to make sure that it goes on tour. Or it premieres at one film festival, something like that. And then once you know what your goals are, who is going to help you achieve your goals? So if you wanted to premiere at one film festival, what is the film festival? Who is the decision maker at that film festival? Figuring out who the people are that you're trying to reach is very important. And then finally, what will resonate with that audience? So you know what your goal is, you know who the audience is. How do you reach them in a way that's meaningful? So using my example of the Invisible Dog Art Center, let's say we want to focus on one goal. I want to grow our apartment rental business. 3 audiences who might be excited about participating in me achieving this goal would be locals with out-of-town guests, tourists that love art and want to take advantage of staying in a place filled with incredible art. I feel like I'm advertising Invisible Dog right now. You should totally stay there. It's beautiful art. And 3, tourists looking for a unique local experience, which we know is a thing right now, thanks Airbnb. So what would be some messages that might resonate with these audiences? One, let's say if we're thinking about locals with out-of-town guests, you want to focus on convenience and affordability, right? These are, I know whenever I have an out-of-town guest, those are the things I'm thinking about. For tourists that love art, of course, you're just going to lean into the art collection. Who is the owner of all this art? It's Lucien himself, telling his story, sharing his artwork, getting people feeling like they're connecting with something truly unique and special. And then for that third one, you might talk about the art, but you also will talk about the neighborhood that Invisible Dog is situated within. You're going to talk about the incredible coffee shop that's downstairs that is a destination. You're going to talk about the award-winning restaurants just around the corner. True story. I really am advertising Invisible Dog right now. But you see how each of these becomes its own narrative depending on who your audience is. So next up, you know what your key messages are. How do you know if they're actually good, if they're the right messages, if they will truly resonate with that audience that you've identified? So your next step is to practice these messages and then refine. And for those of you who are just in that Nick Law keynote, this is sort of this thing he was talking about just at the end about the way that brands function in the world these days is like you put your brand out there and your audience interacts with it, and that is going to impact your story and your, the way you show up in the world, and it's going to make you show up in a way that is more authentic and rooted in your community. So in order to begin with practicing your message, the questions you're going to ask yourself are, what channels are you going to use to do this work? And what resources do you need? So let's use another real-life example. So this is a project called By the Olive Trees, Stories of the Syrian Diaspora by 2 guys named Michael Freiberg and Benjamin Rasmussen. Does anyone know these guys by any chance? They're photographers, they're great. So they're well-respected photographers. This was a photo documentary project. This is actually from a while ago. This is before even the Syrian sort of the crisis hit the news in a major way. And these were 2 guys who wanted to humanize this story and make people care about it. This is before that famous picture of the kid, sort of the 4-year-old kid, like made the headlines and people weren't sort of even noticing this was a thing. So the thing that they wanted to do was make not only a beautiful series of photographs, but also a series of photographs that would be seen and reach the Syrian diaspora and also everyday people like you and me, because they didn't want to just do like another editorial story that would appear in photo magazines or in rarefied, art galleries, but really reach individuals and humans. So they were going to make this like free newsprint they imagined would be distributed everywhere. So using that tool I shared with you earlier to give you another example of how that tool might play out, the goals were 1, reach as many people as possible, 2, humanize the Syrian refugee crisis, 3, create an inexpensive publication that can easily be distributed. So you can see these are very simple goals, nothing complicated about them. You might be judging me for oversimplifying. You can have more complicated goals, that's fine. Once you know what your goals are, figure out who your audience is. So who might be interested in this project? People interested in international affairs. 2, other photographers and photo editors. And then 3, the Syrian diaspora. By the way, I'm totally imagining all of this. I did talk to these guys a little when they were working on their Kickstarter campaign, but I'm just illustrating an idea. So using the example of other photographers, let's say they wanted to reach other photographers, a key message might be, established editorial photographers stepped outside their comfort zone and traveled to Jordan to create a series of large and medium format photographs of people affected by the Syrian civil war. So this is the key message, like I said, where all of your other kinds of messages, whether it's a press release or content on social media, things that you talk about in an interview, this is where all of that sort of stems from. So now, going back to the original questions, what channel should you use and what assets will you need? You should use the target audience you defined to guide you on figuring out which channels you should use. So the channels that you select and the audience that you're targeting will inform the assets that you need. So for example, if you're posting on Facebook wait, I have an example I can show you. So, I'll get there in a second. So this is another tool. This is a tool that basically plays out this thing I just described to you. So figuring out who your target audience is, figuring out what channels that audience hangs out on, and then what are the assets that are most suitable for that channel and for that community. And here's how we could fill it in. So for example, photography insiders spend time reading and consuming content on websites like Time Lightbox, PDO Online, featureshoot.com, and the things that they respond to or are excited about might be media-rich press release for the photo community. So straight up, old school, old-fashioned press release really resonates well with photo editors, I've been told. For example, though, if you're trying to reach the Syrian diaspora, we know community is everywhere. It's part of the situation. We do know that community gathers in various places. There's local communities, but then there's online sort of global groups where people might gather. Facebook has become a powerful place for this to happen. Looking specifically at that community of people, just everyday humans, and Facebook as a channel, we know that photos and pull quotes from the stories featured in the project would probably resonate and help to build an audience around that project, build a following around that project. Okay, so we've defined our key messages, we figured out who our people are and what we need to reach them and how we're gonna reach them. This is when we start building our list. So as you're practicing and refining your message in the world, you have to make sure that you're not just putting things out there, testing them, pulling them back, adjusting them, but that you're actually collecting and building a list as you work. And so, as I mentioned earlier, Facebook is an incredible place to do this. It's an easy way to put content out, both in your own Facebook fan page, but also in existing groups around the internet. I myself am a member of many. But the downside of Facebook, of course, is you can't collect email addresses. So it's also important to explore lots of different medium. One other thing I want to say about this long list of different kinds of channels, so again, your channel should be informed by where your audience is, but it should also be informed by where you are comfortable. So quickly, for example, I once worked with an artist and musician who we walked through all this material together, and he said, I hate the internet, I hate self-promotion, I hate putting my stuff online, and I don't know anybody. And I was like, okay, cool. But that's not going to work if you want to launch an album by yourself, because he'd always worked with a label. And so I encouraged him to go on, he had existing groups sort of through a previous management situation, and just to start testing the waters to see where he was getting engagement, where people were excited about his content, but also maybe more importantly, where he enjoyed posting. So he started posting on Facebook, and he started posting on Tumblr, and he started posting on Instagram. He didn't touch Twitter. He started posting in a newsletter. And he, like millions and millions and millions of others, discovered that he really loved Instagram. He loved the format of it. It felt low pressure. He loved all the hearts he got. He loved the easy lift and engagement he got. And for him, he wasn't focused on conversion in that moment, and so that was actually perfect for him. He was able to test a lot of content quite quickly. He also discovered that he liked Facebook because ultimately his goal was to grow his audience, and because you can encourage people to share content on your behalf on Facebook quite easily, he found that Facebook was helping him reach more people. So I think, again, when you're just defining your channels, figure out not only where your fans or your future fans are, but where you like to be. I also want to point out that email is really powerful. There's a lot of marketers in this room, so you all know email converts really well. If you can convince people to keep opening your email and keep engaging with your email, it's really going to be a powerful base for you. And there's a lot of really great tools out there these days for doing it. MailChimp is, I think, one of the most robust, especially if you're trying to roll your own. I was speaking with someone earlier who told me, I think she might be in this room, I'm going to quote you. She wasn't yet at a place with her business where she was going to have her own website. And we talked about how you can have a free Tumblr, buy your own domain name, use services like MailChimp or even MailChimp's Tiny Letter to start doing your own thing, and you're really not spending a ton of money. MailChimp offers also ways to make easy email sign-up forms, and they also just rolled out this landing page tool where you can create custom landing pages to collect email addresses. One thing I'll say when you use these sort of landing page tools is I don't love enter to win kind of opportunities. What I've seen is that they don't build lasting fan bases or lasting communities around you and your work. This was like the prettiest screenshot I could find, so I used it. But I do think exclusive opportunities are great. So things like this is a Shopify tool, so offering people educational resources or be the first to get notified when the pre-sale goes live, or get invited to exclusive events, or get discounts. I think all that stuff works really well. Making people feel, incentivizing them by offering them a reward is a good idea. Especially if it's a timely thing, like sign up in the next 5 days too. So I want to take a quick second to focus on this final bullet point I offered up here, which is influencers, and I put micro in parentheses. One thing I noticed while working at Kickstarter is people were really focused on influencers, like over-focused on influencers. If I could just get this one person to tweet about me, then all my problems would be solved. The truth is that that's not truly the case. It's kind of the case, though, if you do focus on micro-influencers. So to give you an idea, going back to our by the olive trees example, if, let's say, those two guys, Michael and Ben, decided that they did want to work with an influencer to help them spread their word and get the message out, they could have possibly approached Brandon Stanton. I'm sure many of you know Humans of New York, like millions of followers. So Brandon is a great example of a micro-influencer. He's not, someone actually just told me there's a distinction between this, where it's like celebrity versus, I can't remember, whatever. But Brandon's a great example of a micro-influencer. He does have millions of followers. I think at last look, he has like 5 or 6 million followers on Instagram. He's a big deal. However, the people that know him and care about him are a much narrower sort of channel than people who know about Brad Pitt. That said, if you engage someone like Brandon Stanton into helping you tell your story on your behalf, his community is much more invested, cares a lot more in the content, and they're also huge fans and advocates of him, and so they're much more likely to tell stories that he's telling, like spread the word about Brandon. So for example, when Brandon did a story about the Syrian diaspora a year or two ago, it was a big deal. Everyone was talking about it. Everyone was tagging each other in the Instagram posts. It got tons of press. So this is a great example of how if Ben and Michael wanted to spread the word about their project, about the Syrian diaspora, going to an influencer like Brandon would be a great move. The thing I want to say also about micro-influencers, you can't just be like, hey, yo, what up? Can you tell people about my project? You have to build an authentic relationship with them, start following them, engaging with their content, knowing what they're about. And when you do finally reach out to them, make sure that you sort of put your common interests forward, right? So for example, if I was gonna write a vegan cookbook, I'm vegan, I follow a lot of vegan cookbook writers on Instagram. I wouldn't just reach out to them and say, write about my book. I would make sure to build a real relationship with them in advance. All right, so we know what our key messages are. We've begun to practice and refine those messages in the real world using assets like photo and video and GIFs and even copy. And we've also begun to build a list. So now, ideally, if we've done everything up until this point well, if we've followed all those steps, this part is going to be a piece of cake. The actual promotion work, this is the crazy thing, is actually easy if you do have that community of followers working sort of in tandem with you, sharing your story on your behalf. So the important things to keep in mind here when you're promoting are you want to use specific key messages and assets. So this is all that work you've done. Targeted to the right people. So that's the audience who've opted in. They've already said, yes, I care about what you're doing. And then it's timely so that it's delivered at the right time, which means that you're not, this is something I saw on Kickstarter a lot, people would only start communicating with people when they launched their project. They wouldn't start a month before, they wouldn't start 2 months before, they wouldn't start a year and a half before. And I highly recommend thinking about what is a low pressure way to start getting your idea out into the world, building that community, getting them in conversation and dialogue with you, so when those critical moments happen, whether it's launching a new product or whatever it is, that you have people sort of ready and by your side to share your message. But above all, and this is also, I'm happy that so many of the keynotes the past couple days have reflected this, because this is really true, is to create compelling and shareable content. And I know this seems so obvious, but I can't tell you how often I follow. So for me, for the work I do, in order to learn how to do this and do this well, I follow a ton of people online, and I look and see how they've done it. And one thing I know is that some people just promote themselves, and some people think about how they can inform and inspire. And that is your job. It is not to promote, it is not to sell, it is not to ask people for stuff. It is not about asking, asking, asking. It is about being generous, it is about giving, it is about providing inspiration, and it's providing information. And if you do this well, people will share your message on your behalf. So I just mentioned earlier, I follow a lot of people on the internet. I follow individuals and I follow brands. I follow small brands, I follow big brands. And we are in this really exciting moment where individuals and small brands do have an incredible, there's a lot of tools and resources and platforms out there that make it easy for them to reach the right people at the right time with the right stuff. So this is a brand I follow called Ace and Jig on the top row. And I literally just pulled their 3 most recent Instagram posts yesterday. This is a great example of a mix of the kind of content they share. They just released their spring line. So literally like 5 days ago, new line, they're very excited. They want people to buy it because then they will have a good business. But look what they're posting. They're posting pictures of themselves in their factory. So they're talking about their brand values. They're saying we care about where our stuff is made and we care about how it's made. There's also pictures of the founder. So it's also a personal story. They're inserting themselves into the story. In the middle, you see an image from the spring line. So they are talking about that. And then at the end, they hosted a community event, right? So they said, hey, we've teamed up with some of our favorite sister brands, some of the brands who have the shared values and ethos with us. We're in Portland. We're hosting an event that we're going to offer you sample sales stuff. We're going to offer you fun and activities and crafts, and we're going to offer you community. One thing about the Ace and Jig brand that's really cool, does anyone know Ace and Jig in here? I see a hand go up. So something, or 2, 3, few. Something really cool about this brand is that they have this like Instagram hashtag community. So the Ace and Jig stuff is quite pricey, but it's built to last. And so what the community has done is they've organized on Instagram via hashtags to sell and trade their items. So maybe you're going to pay $300, $400 for that dress, but there's a whole community of swapping that goes on. So maybe you'll wear that dress for a couple years, swap with somebody else, and it then continues to have an ongoing life. And so their Instagram feed is very much about engaging that community. This on the bottom row is an example of an individual. This is a woman who lives in Brooklyn. Her name is Kay Blegvad. She's a really talented artist and designer. I met her, I'd been following her for a long time. I met her when she launched an incredible book telling the story of her lifelong relationship with depression. But this is an example of 2 of her recent Instagram posts. And again, she has a sale going on right now, a spring sale. And you can see she has creative, fun, engaging ways of showing her beautiful work off and also talking to her community. So she's not overselling. This is about dialogue. This is about being in conversation with your community. So here's my final tool I want to share with you all. And this one, I made it because I think like you kind of like, this one's more of a roll your own. It kind of depends on how anal you are. But at the very, very least, you should have a spreadsheet where you're mapping out when you're posting something, what you're posting, and then thinking about target audience, assets, key messages, and then where that stuff goes live. The cool thing is that there's lots of tools that support this kind of content. There's everything from like sophisticated content schedulers. Some are free, some are cheap, some are expensive for doing it. Many of you probably use the fancy end of these things for your businesses. This exists for individual brands as well. Or you can use a content calendar. This is something that I used at Kickstarter when I was there. It's just a simple content calendar to map out our plan for what we were creating when, always laddering up. We had 3 core values on my team, and so we were always making sure to ladder up to those core values, and that the content we were creating was always within one of those buckets. And then, or you could use a spreadsheet. I mean, spreadsheets are magic like that. And spreadsheets are great because you can link to things like assets, you could link to copy docs, you could link to all sorts of things. So those are the 4 things. That's defining your key messages, practice and refining those messages in the world, building your lists. This is your fan community. And then also finally promoting with intent. And like I said, I oversimplified everything on purpose so we could have time for Q&A. So I would love to take any questions you might have. If you do have a question, there is a microphone directly behind the camera. So if you could go to the microphone, that would be great. It's me. Thanks. Can you step to the microphone? Thank you.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. I'm a business coach for creatives, and one of the things I think is so helpful for them is when presenters like you share those templates. You know, you've put together like a Google Doc or something like that. Do you have anything like that that you could share with the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So great question. So if you look at this short link down here, I actually based this talk on a class, a free class I did for a website called Skillshare. And I created 3 tools as part of that class. So if you go to that URL, it's a free class, you can watch. It's a more in-depth version of this talk. You can watch the video and then download the tools.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi. Hello. There. So I'm currently working on a project where I need to reach out and to different creative people and get submissions from different creative people or get them to answer questions as a part of the content that I'm bringing together around a theme. And when it comes to my personal network, that's great, but then getting from the point of your personal network to the next, like reaching out to people you don't necessarily know, do you have any tips on that?
Yeah, I do. So this is going to sound like a cop-out answer, but I promise you it's true. It's 2-parter. One is, of course, the people who've already responded, your actual network, encouraging them to support you in doing that outreach. A friend of mine actually just did this to me. She has an idea for a business. I saw she posted on Twitter, she posted on LinkedIn, she posted on Facebook. I'm imagining she wasn't getting the responses she wanted because you have to fill out a Google form, who has time. She then went and started tagging us all in the posts to make it clear, like, I'm counting on you. And then the next step was she encouraged us to then tag other people and help her share the post. So part 1, which seems very obvious, but I think is a really actually generative step. And then part 2 is actually reaching out to people. So one thing I've found as an individual or working with a company, is that people are generally pretty responsive and pretty generous. As flawed as the world is, people ultimately do want to help each other. So this is where practicing and refining your message comes into play. I would test out reaching to people who you think would be great respondents for your survey and do one at a time, right? So do one, see if they respond. If they do, great, that means your message is probably in pretty good shape. If they don't, think about how you can tweak the message, make it more compelling. Maybe I say 90% of the time, edit it, like remove 30% of the words. Thinking about an image, you can include, think about how you can tailor those messages. So let's say you're writing to someone, you know, like I have this example of, you know, these folks, by the way, I realize all my examples are super girly, but maybe you're writing to someone that looks more like the survival guide guys that I showed earlier, and so you want to make sure that your message is resonating with them. So I would say this is where that practicing and refining your asset sort of library and your words come into play. And really, people do respond.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great question.
Hi. I was wondering if you have any other further suggestions, or if this goes into place for a company that's already very large and has established their brand, but could use a rebrand.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I love that you're asking that question. I think I was speaking with someone earlier during the speed coaching session. We had it was Sam. She was like, we have a large established brand. We're trying to figure out how to use visual storytelling to continue to grow and build our community. And what we talked about was the age-old, and this is very related to what I just talked about in this workshop, is brainstorming a bunch of ideas, popcorn style, and then starting to prototype and iterate on those ideas. The thing about that is, again, building actually off what Nick Law was just talking about, is that you want to have a specific audience in mind. So it's like, okay, here's our brand, here's how we're established, this is what we're known for, this is our visual identity, this is the way we talk to people. What are some core values you draw from that to think about who are the new audiences you're hoping to reach? And then what are some very tiny actions you can take to start connecting with those people? Is it launching a new Instagram channel where you're posting every day? We were just talking about where you're posting every day. Is it making a newsletter, right? Is it, so for example, at my company at Imprint Projects, one thing I'm trying to do right now is to grow and empower the creative community that we have around us. And so I'm talking about creating a new newsletter that is dedicated just on those creatives who we work with every day. So I can tell you in my inbox every day I get a zillion amazing sounding job descriptions. So what if we just package those up and turn that into a newsletter? Then we start to build our community of creative people that we collaborate with regularly. So it's figuring out who those people are, what are some easy opportunities, some easy lift, test it out. And when I say easy lift, meaning like don't involve a design team and a copywriter and a strategist and your boss. Like really, what is one thing you can do without a ton of permission and a ton of resources to start to figure out how to build that brand? The other idea I have, which is I didn't really touch on here, is of course partnerships. So in that example of Ace and Jig, I showed that they were highlighting 3 other brands that they were doing that event with, and that is really one of the most effective ways that brands are growing their brand communities right now, is through like affinity partnerships.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello. You touched on this a little bit already with the micro influencers, and you had mentioned trying to build a relationship before you reach out to them. But my question is, especially with your example, how they have so many followers, so you just following them and kind of interacting with their Instagram, I feel like that's not going to get you noticed. So when you do contact, it probably seems really stark and out there, and you might not have much to offer. But
Yeah.
how do you go about approaching a micro influencer just a little bit more in depth, so it doesn't seem so I need you, but I know you don't need me situation?
Yeah, and this is where that timeliness and that sort of early groundwork is really important. So if we'll stick with that example, let's say I knew I was going to begin work on a project about the Syrian diaspora. I knew that down the line I was going to have some sort of big launch moment that I would want to sort of grow awareness for. I would start creating content online, as already discussed. And I would find ways to start to make sure that like try to seed content towards that person or towards that person's community. It's funny because I did use kind of a huge example, but let's shoot for the stars. So I would start to build that content and giving myself enough runway, let's say months or even a year and a half. I know a story of a filmmaker who told me he knew he was going to launch a Kickstarter campaign. He wanted to raise over $100,000. So 18 months before he launched that campaign, because $100,000 is a lot of money from a lot of people, he started you guys probably know him, he started a website called No Film School. And he started creating free content for filmmakers with the goal of reaching filmmakers and starting to provide them with resources and engaging people in a very generative and generous way. So that 18 months later, when it came time for the ask, he could reach out to the more influential people within that community where he'd started to build profiles, started to become recognized, and ask them for something. And the sort of core part of that story as well is you're not just building on your own property, so your website, nofilmschool.com, but as you gain awareness, you're reaching out, you're doing guest posts on other websites, maybe you're guest posting in someone's social feed. You're starting to like build your way closer to the person that you're trying to reach. And if this sounds like a lot of work, it is. But the thing that I will say is this is work you should be doing anyway. So even if at the end of that journey you don't reach Brandon from Humans of New York, but you reach 4 people that look like him, you've done a great job.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi there.
Hi.
So I have a creative project. It's a blog that I sort of started as a hobby, and it was sort of like unfocused at first, but I'd love for it to be more. But I did end up like taking a break from it, and it's kind of just like sitting there idly right now. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering, is that something that like you should address to your audience if you like start it back up again, or should you just kind of like ignore it and like, you know, just remain focused and continue to restart it, I guess?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would vote address it, be transparent. We're in a communication moment where people are very human. I think this was covered in one of the keynotes yesterday. The woman who has a beautiful name from Social Espionage, and I can't remember her name.
She was awesome.
Yeah, she was amazing. And I think what she was saying, which in that sort of that second case about her client, sort of being like maybe having a rough moment with her fans, the angry vegans, by the way, generous vegan right here, and trying to rebuild trust and rebuild that relationship, that was all about transparency. So that's a really extreme example, but I think in your case, something that I've seen a lot of creatives do and a lot of people on the internet do is it's almost kind of owning the fact that we're humans and we're flawed and we're busy and we have a lot going on, and it's not unusual to be like, wow, I haven't posted here in a while. Like that is a thing. I would also encourage you, if you are going to do that, don't do that and then step away for 4 more months. Like do that and then figure out, again, from that talk yesterday where she said, figure out what your cadence is. Even if it's only every month, at least you're sticking to that cadence. I would recommend more than a month, but still being consistent in your communication and reliable is, I mean, this is actually that great, the gift of a content calendar. I'm not a type A person, I'm not super organized, but having a content calendar meant for me, not only was I making sure everything I was creating was laddering up to those key messages, but also was keeping me on a weekly schedule of whatever I'd committed to do.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello. So I'm a single person team, and I'll launch a creative project on Kickstarter about once a year, and I'll cover all the
Congratulations.
expenses. But typically it'll take about maybe like 1 quarter to do all the creative, but then it'll take about the 3-quarter build up for all that content, priming your audience and all that. Is there a way to automate or delegate that kind of work without like destroying your brand to a stranger? Since
The brand, the actual like building your audience work?
yeah, because currently it takes so much time, and if I can at least double the projects that come out in a year, that would be wonderful. But I've heard so
Yeah.
many horror stories of
I know.
immediate hires. And
Yeah, this is a great example. Where I've seen people be most successful when you're like, how do I speed up the frequency of this? How do I like delegate without totally ruining my brand? Where I've seen the most success is when people draw from their own community for those hires. So a great example is a company called 3Doodler. They make a 3D printing pen for adults and kids and professionals. And they've always operated really lean when it came time to start bringing on community managers, specifically around their Kickstarter campaigns, but also around managing their growing, incredible fan base, to make sure that they took good care of those people and kept them engaged. They hired from their community. And I think the quality of the work those community managers were doing really shows. So the thing that they did to set those people up for success, though, is they did give them very clear and easy to use brand templates. So, you know, all that visual ID stuff that you said that you work on, all that, the sort of, this is the kind of stuff, we write things that are fun and light and educational. We don't take on global politics, whatever it is. Here's an asset library. Making sure that those people are equipped with those tools is key. But I think if you can, figuring out who are your fans, who are the people that are already following you, who are people who are already creating that user-generated content that are in a way already doing that kind of work for you. How can you, and this is something I did at Kickstarter. So when I was leading the creator engagement community at Kickstarter, the community there is over 100,000 people located in 21 countries around the world. And so my job was to figure out, how do I create engaging content? How do I create a sense of community for those 100,000 people? And the only way to do that, besides, of course, segmentation, was to find our lead community members, the people who are already, again, writing on our behalf, speaking on our behalf, or running events on our behalf, and empowering them with tools and talking points, and also the Kickstarter platform, when appropriate, to do that work on our behalf.
And so are those volunteers, or are they getting paid and compensated?
They were, in that case, yeah, they were volunteers, and I specifically defined the work in a way that it was appropriate for them to be volunteers. It wasn't a huge workload. It wasn't really amplifying the amount of work they were already doing. What I was trying to do was just simply create lift for the work they were already doing, give them more platform or more profile. I gave them badges on Kickstarter so they could kind of have some swagger when they spoke about us. In the case of 3Doodler, it was a hire. It was a community manager hire. And I will say that it is not uncommon in the case of spinning up for a launch to bring on a short-term hire just to work with you for that period and not make it a full-time hire. As long as you're equipping them with the right tools and they already know you and your brand and have been making content on your behalf, they're going to be really well set up to do that work.
Thank you.
Yeah. And unless there's one more question, I think we're just about out of time. All right, thank you, everybody.